And we're live.
Hello, everyone, to this 2 weeks Ipld meeting. It's streamed for the first time since a long time, but that's great. It's September the 27th, 2021. And as usually every 2 weeks, we go over the stuff that we've worked on or people have worked on or heard about, and then discuss any open items there might be. As recently, I don't have anything to report. So I hand it over to Danielle, who has something to say.
Yeah, I was totally not finishing my own notes here, but so I actually, I haven't been in any of these calls for like 2 months because I was away for a couple of weeks and then we had a team meeting and I was traveling and so on. So I'm going to give a sort of 2 months update instead of 2 weeks update. The main chunk of work Ipld wise that I've been doing is something that Eric and I had been talking about in early summer, which is what we call the schema work. And essentially it's being able to parse and use schemas as the schema language that we define in the specs. Because right now there's no parser for that. There is the Go Ipld schema repo that does implement a parser and does implement the sort of AST. I don't believe that that compiles to the schema package that you can actually use. But it's, in any case, it's like a separate module. So it's never been fully, what's the word I'm looking for? Fully merged into the main Ipld prime repo. So what I've been trying to do is essentially think of how it could fit, because I believe Eric tried a couple of ways with the schema package and also a schema 2 package, but neither of them really worked. So there's a PR that I linked to in the notes, and that works as a proof of concept to parse a schema as a DMT, which is just an AST, a syntax tree. And then it has another function called compile that then gives you a type system with those types. And that works. Well, it's supposed to work. I think I didn't try to use it and I just panicked, but it's got bugs. It's a proof of concept. So I believe Eric suggested to move that to a different package. So I will do that. It should take like an hour. And I believe after that it can be merged. And then it's just going to be a matter of actually seeing if the whole thing works, going from like a schema file to a type system, and then using that with bind node or whatever. I think it should work. As far as the Dean said, it doesn't, but it might be like a silly thing that's missing. And then ideally, we would end up with a top-level function like ipld.load schema that does everything for you. And then you could do something like ipld.load schema and then just use the schema directly without having to fiddle with DMTs and all that stuff. The other piece of work that I had done before this is bind node, which is Ipld node without code generation. I haven't really touched it in a long time. It seems like Eric has been doing some work there. I don't believe many people have been using it, but I think as a proof of concept, it works okay. And what I was writing here is that I might spend some of my next rotation fixing some bugs that he uncovered and adding some more tests. And that is it for me, I think.
Thank you. And next one is Will.
Sure. So I put down a few notes of things that are going on that I think are at least tangentially related to Ipld. Not all of this is stuff that I'm going to take credit for. So one thing that we've been thinking of is better ways to get cars created. Right now, if you've got a bunch of files or a file and directory or this sort of stuff and you want to pull it into a .car, the sort of recommended path is you import it into Ipfs, which makes use of a very large amount of code called the mutable file system abstraction. And then you've got it there in that mutable file system, and then you can export it from Ipfs out to a car. And the question is there like a direct way to go from a file or a directory to a car? I've started looking at it a little bit. I should push, but I'm doing this in a combination of, I think there's better builder abstractions that we can add to the Go Unix FS node ADL abstraction that's been written for how we think about Unix FS data, along with the car CLI command that we've added somewhat recently to the car repo. because it would be really nice if you could just say like car, pack, and then either a file or directory, and you can get the car representation of that. And based on what's happening there, it looks like, at least for a sort of, maybe it's going to be annoying to replicate all the functionality of what's possible with IPFS as it does this ingestion right now. There's a lot of sort of different options that are possible, and we don't necessarily need all of them, but we need something that's compatible, and that should be actually pretty doable, at least on the file part. I think as we get into sharded directories and trying to do all of the edge cases of like, can you append additional things and update the directory and like do all of the things that the mutable file system wants to support, like then we add up with all the same complexity. But there's some simple cases that we can probably support with a lot less code and much more efficiently, and that might be a win. I think Eric maybe has also looked at some of this in an Ipld CLI that he started poking at. The other one that I know of that's going on is, they're not on the call, but the people from Ipld have made a CLI called make car. That one builds a car off of JSON structured data. So if you've got JSON LD data and you want to turn that into an Ipld DAG in a car, it'll do that conversion. So if you've got sort of structured textual data or stuff where we've got a schema, you can do an Ipld native conversion to a car. And that seems like a useful thing to see enter the world a little bit more as well. Short update on Ipld prime in IPFS. So that got merged to master a while ago and is almost out the door. There's some flags changing, but I think that's largely fine. I think there was an interesting ADL edge case in terms of how that Unix FS ADL interacted with the Fuse file system that's getting stared at.
There were some outright bugs around context cancellation that I think have mostly been addressed now.
Great. And then there's some underlying work going on in GraphSync, so the data transfer protocol as it relates to Ipld. And so the interesting things there, we should see pretty soon an update to that Go Data Transfer GraphSync that supports partial DAG transfer. So rather than just failing, you get it just sort of stops when it can't follow a link, and lets the client decide if that's a failure or if that's just you got what you got. You can potentially make another request for that missing link or something. And then the other thing that we'll need to think about eventually is how GraphSync as a protocol, especially with this sort of world, how do we extend it to multiple sources? So, this is, this fundamental thing of BitSwap can handle getting blocks from multiple peers at the same time. GraphSync right now is a one-to-one protocol. And we need to scope what the selector and then GraphSync changes are. To be able to say things like, great, I got this root block from you and it has a bunch of children. I'm going to ask you now to revise your selector to not have one of those children, and I'm going to go ask some other potential source for that child subdag. And that probably looks a lot like how task schedulers in the past have done work stealing. So there's a lot of, how do you efficiently do this that we can lean on there. But that's sort of going to be maybe the next sort of larger design algorithms / actual practical thing that needs to happen in that data transfer stack. So some exciting stuff there coming up. That's it for me.
Thanks. I just reminded myself that I have something to say because I'm still maintaining the Rust libraries of Ipld. So there's not that much happening, but there's an open PR about making read-write no standard compatible. And if anyone's watching this, more eyes would be appreciated because I have some experience with no standard, but if someone has more experience, that would be great. To have another review on that one. Yeah, that's all. Next is Eric.
Yeah, so I will also start off with some recappy type stuff because some of this stuff has not been touched on in the videos that we've recorded and made public. So in the same sort of like epochs of history where we started actually seeing Go IPFS starting to use a bunch of stuff, we've cranked out a couple of releases of the Go Ipld prime library and tagged them. There has been a version 0.11.0 where the most notable change was a bunch of our codecs started forcing sorting on you now on the way out. This is a change of behavior from the older versions. They still don't force sorting on you on the way in. Be aware of this as you update things, because it's one of those fun changes that does not actually get hinted to you by the compiler either. There was also a version 0.12.0 tagged, and okay, a couple patch releases after that too. The big news there is that there was a really big refactor so that there is a new package called data model, into which a bunch of the most core interfaces went. And as a result of this, the root package of the repo, the Ipld package there, is now a bunch of aliases that mostly point into the data model package, but can now point into other packages. So we took the thing that was the bottom of the dependency graph and pushed it off a little bit to one side. And the intention of this overall is that now we can add more functions and methods into the root package, which do what you mean, whatever that may be. And we can have those functions freely depend on other like complex high-level features, and the dependency graph will still like work correctly. And so if you're upgrading to version 0.12.0, the even number does mean that this should be smooth. There's so many aliases using the Go type alias feature that I believe almost any user can actually just upgrade to this and nothing happens. In the future, I think if you're writing library code that you want to be highly reusable by other people, you should use the new lower level data model package. And if you're writing code just for yourself and you don't really care about the reusability, go ahead and keep using the root package. The only real functional difference is that in the root package, you'll drag in more transitive dependencies. Like you will always drag it in JSON parser, even if you didn't need it technically, because compiled. So, and in the future, now we can accept a lot more PRs about adding helper methods and like cool examples to the root package and things like this. So very exciting. One of the other pieces of review news that's a couple weeks old now, but still really cool, so I want to touch on it briefly, is the test mark fixtures format. This is a new format for writing tests and embedding them in your markdown. Okay, not writing tests, writing fixtures and embedding them in your markdown. You still have to write a little bit of glue code in your language of choice, but parsing the fixtures out can now be automated and you can start scripting around that stuff. So I've written a system in Go, and Rod has already contributed a system in JS. It took him a day because he's both a wizard, and I'd like to claim that the parser is fairly easy. So what this format looks like is code blocks and markdown. That's it. So we started using this in a couple of pieces of the Ipld specs and docs website already. So our latest generation of fixtures and docs for selectors, it's the same thing. The documentation is literally the data that we evaluate in the tests. So for the first time, I think the documentation on selectors is good. I hope that we start doing more of this. I think Rod's also converted some Codec Fixture stuff, and that's really nice. I'm just using it everywhere I can. In more recent news, if anybody out there is hankering to like keep an eye on the progress towards implementing things like Unix FSv1 as ADLs, I popped open an issue to that. It's number 258, or you can go to the HackMD and find the link. We'll see if anybody is going to be able to like pick up and focus on that work, but now there's at least a discussion point there. I'm kicking off a new interesting little project. Maybe we'll go somewhere, maybe won't, of making an Ipld CLI. I'm going with the intention of like building some sort of a JQ-like vibe here. I think a bunch of us have talked about this for just ages, and I'm gonna start taking a chisel to stone and doing it. So we'll see how that goes. I'm using more test mark to document the heck out of it from the start and try to build examples of how this should all work. And if people have ideas about the behaviors that they would want from things, I think it's now already in a PR's welcome state. I've gotten this to the point where there's like some hello world commands and a little bit of framework for seeing like, here's where you would add new commands and new test fixtures for them. So from now on, if anybody has an idea for something they want a CLI tool to do, let's do it. I'm putting this for the moment anyway, inside the Go Ipld prime repo as a separate Go module. So it does not drag additional transitive dependencies into your system if you're just using libraries, but it's still in one repo. So development is like pretty straightforward. I have no idea how that's going to go. I hope it goes okay. If it doesn't go okay, it'll get extracted to a new repo. We'll see. I still have one more thing. I'm so sorry for taking so long. There's also a new repo out there called Go Datalark, which is a portmanteau of, I don't know, data and Starlark. Starlark is an interpreted language that has been hoisted out of the Bazel project, and it's kind of like a cool Python-like little dialect of the language. It's easily interpretable and has like, I think at least 3 different interpreters now. There's a Golang one, a Rust one, and a Java one. So a reasonably well standardized language with a reasonable amount of adoption. And now we have bindings to Go Ipld prime in the Go implementation of Starlark. So you can call constructor functions in Starlark and munge data model trees. And in progress is if you have some data with a schema in Golang, you can map it into Starlark and walk around it like Python-like objects in Starlark. And you can also map in an object full of constructor functions to make that structurally typed data there too. If anyone is interested in this, PR is extremely welcome. I kind of did a like weekend hobby project here, and we'll see how far this is worth going with. So if anyone's interested, yes, please find that repo and get in touch. It's the end of my news.
Next one is Rob.
It's interesting. I spent a lot of time doing just minor supportive work across both JavaScript and Go. Lots of little dangling pieces in the JavaScript stack that sort of fall on. So multi-formats and JavaScript. The state of that stack is pretty good, but again, fairly minimal in terms of the level of support it offers, and we haven't found a way to prioritize anything more sophisticated. I do tinker fairly regularly with alternative approaches, but it's hard to sort of prioritize doing that because the need isn't as clear. But it would be nice to have some more higher level functionality for Ipld in JavaScript. But one day. So I've been getting a lot more familiar with Go Ipld prime, doing Go work here. So that's been really good. So contributing to the Go IPFS work as well was very instructive. And now I'm got my head all over selectors and both consuming and working with them, and a bunch of other things as well. So that's been good, but not a lot to report there. And the only other major thing was the Codec Fixtures work with Eric mentioned. There's a repo, Codec Fixtures. The fixtures are, the idea behind it is that they're fixtures mainly containing edge cases, but also some general cases for encoding various forms of data into Ipld. And the way we test them is testing fixtures against each other. So we take some data, we decode it using a codec, and then we re-encode it using a different codec, and then we check the CID is what we expect. And then when we do that between all the combinations and check that the CIDs are the ones we want, then we can assert that that codec was both and decoded the data correctly and encoded the data correctly when it goes both ways. So it's using codecs to test each other and CIDs to assert correctness. That data has also been extracted using the test mark format into the new Ipld/Ipld repo, but it's not yet consumed from there. That's another bit of work. There's probably always going to be a case for a special repo to run some of the tests, just because when you're pulling in all the codecs together, it's like I don't, in JavaScript, for example, I don't want to be pulling in DAG PB and DAG JSON just to test the DAG Zebor repo, and you don't want to be pulling them all into each other's repos just to test them. It's a little bit different in Go, where it might be practical to do a lot of this in Go Ipld Prime. But then if we start adding fixtures for like DAG Jose, which I've got a pull request for to add the DAG Jose fixtures into there, or some basic ones, which they don't work across languages at the moment, so there's problems. Then you're potentially pulling in all sorts of codecs from around the place to test each other. So I think the case for a separate repo is probably still remain there in some form, even if we do push the fixtures to that the specs and documentation repo. So yeah, and that there's a cron GitHub action in there as well that will pull in the latest of all of the pieces to test them, and so sort of get early warning of any failures if there's any weirdness going on in any updates. So that's that. Aside from that, not a whole lot of other interesting stuff. It's mainly just been just small contributive work around the place. So that's me.
Thanks. Any other updates from anyone? I need to check if we have any agenda items. Yes, there are.
I left a couple.
Yeah.
But they're short ones. They're more directed at Eric, but I thought might as well bring them up here. One of them, I think I brought it up in the Ipld channel in Slack a couple of weeks ago, which is that back in winter, somebody contributed a new Go multi-codec Go module, because the previous one we had was massive and unmaintained. And the new one is just code-generated constants with a string method and a set method, I believe. And that works fine. But after that, Ipld Prime also gained a multi-codec package, which is a multi-codec registry for, I think, registering encoders and decoders. And that's fine, but having the two packages with the same name is really confusing. So could we please rename the latter to something like multi-registry or something like that? Cool. Because I think if we just forward the APIs, it shouldn't break anybody.
Yeah, I can be easily sold on that. That seems totally reasonable.
Cool. I will do that. And the other one is, like after some recent changes, we removed schema 2, and also, well, we're about to remove schema 2, but we also removed quip. And I'm wondering, can we remove DAG.json too? Because I'm not sure if it's got any future.
Yep, agreed. I was hoping to get slightly more reusability out of some components of that, but it did not show up. It is not worth keeping it.
Great. Smaller zips, thank you.
Yep.
I will also send a PR. Or, well, I'll probably let you do the honors, because deleting lots of code feels really good.
Sure. And what about the print format? Was it not JSX? It's something like that though. Is that codec doing anything? The reason I ask is because somebody in the JavaScript stack was pointed to the list of codecs as a directory there, and they said, oh yeah, well, what's this codec? Oh, we need to implement this in JavaScript, and so yeah, leading to some misunderstandings of what that /codec directory is.
We could move to remove that too. Honestly, I think I even already extracted that to another repo and then didn't delete it fast enough because I thought, oh, something about deprecation windows, which was foolish. Yeah, let's kill it with fire. Something else that I guess is briefly on my mind, and I probably don't want to solve synchronously in the meeting, but I'm starting to think about is which of the data storage interfaces we want to run with in the future. That's sort of coming into my mind again. We've got some melange of interfaces between stuff that I've done with link system and data store and loader abstractions. And we've got some old generations of DAG or data or something else. And then the word service or store. And there's like a whole bunch of repos there. And I'm not sure which of them we're supposed to really be a fan of going forward. If anyone has like early thoughts on which of those interfaces are the most useful to bridge and which ones are maybe not, that would be really interesting to me because I have a heck of a time figuring out which is which. And it's getting to the point where now that we've done all of this groundwork to have like the root IPLD package be able to include more connective tissue and show how things work, and now that I'm starting to work on the CLI tool, I'm really seeing like, okay, yeah, it would be nice to show somebody how to glue these all together. And I'm thinking we should figure out which of those things are the most important to highlight and which of them we want to like keep reinforcing around in the future. So thoughts welcome on that, sync or async.
I think Hannah's done the most work with doing the bridging there, and it's been pretty messy. Yeah, because there's not just daggers, there's the block ones as well that have blocks, and then yeah.
I have this intuition that the number of things in motion here should go down from like whatever the number is to like approximately one. One will be a good number of things to be in motion around the storage APIs. But I don't know what the road is going to be like to get there because it's definitely not there today.
And yeah, there's been some additional interfaces added along the way that are really special purpose narrow ones. Like car has its own store reader. That's just a subset of a block reader. It'd be nice if you didn't have to make your own interfaces just to do a read.
Yep, work to do there.
All right. Anything else? Nope. Then I close the meeting, and so goodbye everyone, and see you all again in 2 weeks. Bye everyone.